Ladies and gentlemen, presenting the Professor, Greg Dooley, and the Pundit, Steve Clark. Men, take the mic.
Men's basketball coach Dusty May has hit the street running, putting together a staff and showing interest to those in the transfer portal. Our picks for the Final Four and Michigan hockey in the Frozen Four. The explosion in viewership of the women's tournament. But first, this is the Professor and the Pundit with Greg Dooley and Steve Clark. We're presented by Nick Hopwood, a certified financial planner, founder and president of Peak Wealth Management. Retire with confidence. Congrats to Peak on celebrating its 10-year anniversary, and there's 7 interest rate cuts that were forecasted for 2024, and now there may not be any. Should that affect how you invest? Now is a great opportunity to take a stock of your portfolio. We highly recommend going to Nick's website at peakwm.com. Greg, good to see you.
Not only do we recommend visiting Nick at peakwm.com, click that follow button. Click that share button. Comment, Steve. Tweet at us. We've got a new coach on Twitter, namely Mr. Dusty May.
And in fact, there's a lot of sense of deja vu going on right now because I felt like we just talked about it.
Well, they know we hang out at Oscars a lot. Maybe this is like channeling one of our Oscars conversations.
Yeah, there is a lot to like. I mean, who loses a press conference anyway? I mean, hardly anyone. But he's a character guy who is young but not green, has a credible track record, was a buzzer beater away from coaching in the final last year.
Between the football coach, who's I think 38, Dusty May, and Brandon Naurato, our hockey coach, if you think of the major men's sports, we got a young triumvirate of major sports coaches.
Nobody's collecting Social Security anytime soon.
Sitting on all this cash.
They don't need Nick, or they do need Nick? Then? I think they do need Nick. Those guys do.
Look, the correct answer is you need Nick at any age. He can be able to help you out.
Nick's smiling somewhere. Go ahead.
Some Midwest ties, of course, he has. And I think what's really important, has a lot of people's interest peaking, is he has the support of John Beilein.
That stood out to me in this whole process. It's so amazing that Beilein got involved. He took the call when the home base, Michigan, called. He drove from his place in Florida to this meeting. He met Dusty May. Apparently they got locked in a room together, Steve, and talked hoops for, I've heard, up to a couple hours. He gave his blessing to Ward to hire this man. He answered a bunch of questions about Michigan that made Dusty feel comfortable because Louisville did want him. Louisville thought they had him. And apparently Dusty May had Michigan on his mind the whole time. So Beilein got involved. It makes me feel so good. And, you know, you've heard these things about the relationship between Beilein when he left. How did it go? It was a little rocky. Well, whatever that is, it seems to have been mended, and maybe Beilein's going to be back a little more. So selfishly, maybe Beilein will be back in my class, but maybe he'll be a guy who can help bring this program back, which is great.
It'd be nice. I mean, he would certainly be an ambassador of the Michigan program. A lot of fans who at one time wanted John Beilein fired 10, 12 years ago certainly want his influence in there, and it makes them feel better about where the direction of this basketball team is going. And from what I understand was that part of the reasoning for John Beilein to be there is to convince Dusty May that you can win at a football school. And he was living proof that he was able to do that. And so I think that kind of helped sway things in Michigan's favor for Dusty May to be able to come here.
And I saw, and Steve, you know that he spent some time at IU as, I believe, a student manager under Bobby Knight. Right. And it happened to be the same time when I was there at Indiana getting my MBA. Now, we never hung out, but
you didn't hang out that you remember.
That I remember.
Maybe you did.
Right.
Maybe you did.
I did spend a lot of time at Yogi's. That's down there. Nick's. Used to sink. You know what Sink the Bismarck is, by the way?
No.
So when people used to smoke, like cigarettes in bars.
What are those?
Exactly. You'd put on a glass a napkin, right? And then something would be on top of it, a shot or something like that, right? So it would be over it. And you'd burn little holes around, I think the shot glass.
Okay.
And whoever sunk the Bismarck, like took the burn. It's like Jenga, but with cigarettes and a napkin and something else. Okay.
We find that German battleship that's making such a fuss. We gotta sink the Bismarck 'cause the world depends on us.
That's what you did.
Wow.
That's what you did at Nick's. And Nick's, I believe, is like an institution there. It's like the Rick's.
Quite a visual.
That's
quite a visual you're providing us all.
I think for our listener, our demographic, they're like, yeah, that's kind of what we smoked. You did things. Okay. So had a great time there. You mentioned his press conference, though. You can't win the press conference. We've had, like Brady Hoke got a 10 out of 10 on the press conference. Right. It didn't work out.
Right.
I don't think Rich Rod got a 10, but I think
he was different because you go from what Lloyd Carr was like all those years and being very measured in his press conference, and Rich Rod was just very friendly and like did a Lion King reference. You know, and so it was really unusual. But I remember talking to people. Everybody thought this was going to be a home run. And because new explosive offense, the type of offense that was beating Lloyd Carr's Michigan teams spread, Appalachian State, was coming here. And therefore, championships are on the way.
Right. Alabama wanted him. You know, this is it. Yeah. So there was one thing that stuck out in his press conference that he said. And I played this in my NIL class. In fact, I think I played it in my history of college athletics. He said he spends 25 to 30% of his time on NIL. And in this sentence, he used the word recruiting. He was talking about recruiting donors. In other words, getting big money to support his program. He talked about things like access, which is quid pro quo. You can get more access to our program. Maybe you can come to a practice. Like things you'd never really talk about publicly. We have a point system that gets you things. But he's talking about spending time on this, Steve.
These are all things that would be labeled as a booster a generation ago, and keep them off my campus type of thing. But yes, there is that. And 25 to 30%, I kind of understand it because, especially in the off season, it is about getting NIL donors to the table because without them, a lot of people don't even take a visit on campus anymore until they find out how lucrative the NIL opportunities are.
Yeah, so if that's good news to you, if you're hearing this for the first time, or maybe you heard Dusty May say it, that's the good news. The bad news, Steve, is that Champion Circle, our most prominent collective, NIL collective, the one that raises money, it raised money to help support the One More Year Fund to get people to come back. It's the Those Who Stay Fund. It's the Help Sharon Moore Fund, which between them raised well over $1 million. The Sharon Fund and all that is close to $1 million itself. Last I checked, Steve, they had what I think I have in my couch cushions in the basement in the viewing area. It was less than, I don't have this kind of money, but it was less than $20,000 last I checked. And this has been going for a good week now.
So you're talking building from the basement up.
Yeah, so they need big donors. They need big boulders to come in. And, you know, I liken it to you have a vase. How do you fill it? You have rocks, you have stones, and you have sand. The fan money is the sand. You need the big boulders first, put them in the vase, then the little rocks, and then fill in those gaps with sand. And that's the fan money. That's the $20, $30, $40, $50,000. Hey, that's the reality. He seems like it. And speaking of that, I believe that was one when, Steve, when you ran down your perfect candidate, he's probably pretty close. We said there's no one out there, but he's pretty close.
It's pretty rare to find very many like that. But yeah, you have a guy with Midwest ties. You have a young guy with a credible track record. And you see that his face is a salesman who can raise NIL money. But he's not a greasy salesman. He is a salesman with character. This is a likable guy, a coach that players can identify with. And we saw that from FAU. That was part of his background and his history about keeping these guys around for another year in 23 and 24, at least staying for another year. So not many like out there for sure, but he was one of them.
One thing that came up was a podcast, Steve, not us. He didn't mention the Professor and the Pundit, but
not yet.
He mentioned, and it kind of talks to this guy who's, if there's a gym rat version of a coach, he is a gym rat version of, like, he absorbs coaching lessons. And he mentioned how someone asked him about a situation in a game and how he encouraged a player in practice who made a mistake as opposed to knocking him down, which Bobby Knight, you know, one of his mentors, probably would have done. He said this is a good thing it happened in practice because it's not going to happen in the game. And he talked about how the body language of the player changed as opposed to getting expected to get yelled at. He said this is good, because we're not going to do it in the game. We're going to fix it right here. And he said he heard of that on a podcast. And then he went into, when I hear something good in a podcast, I find out who said it. I reach out to him. I have a conversation with him. I bought the guy's books. And I happen to know he also went on this person's podcast to talk about basketball leadership. I found all this stuff, right, because I was looking for my class. That says something about this guy. Now, so you've got a guy who loves coaching. He's ever-changing. He's always evolving. Beilein did that when he was here, and I think that's important. But the biggest job of being a head coach at Michigan is you're the CEO of a program where donors, players, admissions, the athletic department, right, Learfield, all of these other things are going on, controversy, social media, your strength coach, all of these things have to happen, and you have to manage through them. That's a little bit of a different job of the guy who just always has the whistle in his mouth and is on the court teaching staff. He's got to be able to delegate. So that's great. I want that kind of guy as my head coach, but it's not necessarily where he's going to be spending all his time here at Michigan, right? It's going to be bigger than that. So does it translate to wins? My one question is, does all this good stuff, how does it translate to wins? And I don't know, but we do have a bigger problem right now, Steve. I looked at MGO Board's active scholarship process, and we need players, like straight up. We know we need talent. We need bodies right now.
This is what's happening with every school out there that loses their coach. When the coach is gone, half the players exit, if not more. And we're seeing it in football. We're seeing it in basketball. On the other side of the pill is the fact that the new coach comes in, is expected to bring some of his former players with him. And there are 4 FAU players that are currently in the transfer portal. They're also declaring for the NBA draft. So they're going to get evaluated with the prospect of coming back down if they don't like their evaluation. So this is not set in stone. But the number one player out there right now is Janelle Davis, the number one player from FAU. He's a 6'4" shooting guard from Indiana. Davis shared the AAC's Player of the Year honors this season after averaging 18 points. He is going to declare for the draft and see where he gets evaluated before making a final decision. It doesn't mean he's going to Michigan if he decides to return to college next year, too. And quite frankly, if you're that good, you're more than likely wanting to go in the NBA, but not making it there. You're probably going to a more higher profile school to get more known. But Michigan will certainly get you noticed as well. There are 3 other FAU players that are in the portal as well and can be contacted by anyone in the NCAA. I'm hoping that Michigan might be able to get 1 or 2 of those guys. One of them is a 7-foot center.
Yeah, that all sounds good. We need bodies, but here's the other side of it, right? Let's assume he had a good culture at FAU. Well, if these guys were part of it, and if he looks at these players and like, yeah, they were part of the good culture, they get it. Those are good guys to have around and have in the locker room. For the new guys, everyone's going to be a new guy. For the other players to go, does coach believe that? Tell us about how it was at FAU. He goes, no, he knows what he's doing, or give him some reassurance, or even say, yeah, this is how he likes to do things. So there's a little bit of familiarity and that you get out of a good culture. Maybe he can bring some of that with him. Even if these guys like that are available maybe aren't the caliber of players that maybe we think we should have at Michigan, maybe he gives them a hard look, and maybe he has them in for that reason.
How about the names Zach Novak and Stu Douglas?
Fantastic.
Are they 5-star college hoopsters? No, but were they integral into the importance of building blocks that made the Michigan program under its peak and making a couple of Final Four appearances for the Wolverines?
Steve, you're such a good pundit.
Pundits.
That's such a good take. Can we keep that in the? Can we keep that in the Hall of Fame?
We'll make a drop out of that.
That's good.
You talk about delegation real quick, too.
Yeah.
It looks like Michigan's going to hire the former Oklahoma State coach, Mike Boynton, to be one of those assistants. Now, this guy was a head coach since Brad Underwood left Oklahoma State to go to Illinois. He was his successor there. And he had Kate Cunningham as a player there, but he just recently got fired. Part of the reason why he got fired was obviously poor record, but Oklahoma State's been in the magnifying glass of the NCAA for violations that happened well before Mike Boynton was there. And we know what it's like when there's a magnifying glass on you and there's pending NCAA outcomes. Michigan basketball took a lot of years to recover from it. They finally having to miss the 2022 postseason tournament. It took effect on Oklahoma State, and eventually they fired Boynton. But this is a guy who's known for his defensive coaching, Michigan hasn't played a lot of defense in the last couple of years, so this would, I think, probably be a pretty good hire and somebody, a former head coach, that you could delegate things to.
I assume that we're not going to see a ton of faces retained, but we'll find out, I'm sure, real soon. Speaking of familiar faces, Phil Martelli is still scheduled to come visit my class and speak to
great.
and he's a fantastic speaker. Maybe we'll get some insight on what his future plans are. Oh, one more guest, Steve. Sharon Moore is scheduled to visit my leadership class very soon. Hopefully he'll make it. Something could come up, of course. They're in spring camp, but that'll be fun if that happens.
Hopefully it's the first interview of many.
Speaking of a good culture, Steve, our locker room has a great culture. Let's head there for halftime and blow the whistle.
We're joined by Nick Hopwood, certified financial planner. He's also the president and founder of Peak Wealth Management. Now, Nick, you're known as Mr. Roth as we continue to discuss the differences between traditional versus Roth IRAs and 401ks and what's better for you, the listener. We've talked about some of the advantages that a Roth has, like growing tax-free forever.
The other advantage with Roth, if I'm correct too, is the government doesn't have any rules on when you have to start drawing it down, where the other way, I believe, if I'm correct, right, is you have to start, because they want their tax money, right, because you have to pay taxes on those traditional withdrawals. They're kind of dictating to you when you can draw it down, whereas you have that flexibility, right, with the Roth of when to touch it, but more importantly, when not to touch it.
Yeah, the rule was 70 and a half. Now it's 73, and it's going to 75, actually. So this will be 75 for our age group. But imagine this, thinking about those required minimum distributions. If I'm a University of Michigan grad, I'm doing all the right things, great income, great savings. I get to $1 million in my portfolio by age 40. I see a lot of these guys, okay? They got $1 million at 40. Well, if they're growing through deposits and good returns, it should be $2 million minimum by 50, right? If we double every 10 years, $4 million by 60, $8 million by age 70, maybe $12 million by age 75. These are going to be monster required minimum distributions where you're going to be in that 37% bracket, soon to be 39.6 forever. So you just have nowhere to hide on these taxes if you've been a good saver. So that's why 3 years ago, I went 100% Roth because I'm 44, right? I was a good saver up to age 40, and I decided this is going to be a problem. So I'd rather pay the 37% now, get it over with, and be done.
And that's why they call him Mr. Roth.
And again, we highly advise you, if you're thinking about these things on a regular basis, you'd be surprised what Nick can do for you. PeakWM.com. NCAA tournament is in the Final Four.
Which one,
The
Steve?
men and the women. We'll be talking about both. But
I'm trying to think of which one I've enjoyed more, but we'll talk about that.
Yeah, I mentioned your name on the Midweek Peak with Sam and Ira today because what you said in the last podcast was absolutely spot on. We weren't exactly anxious or excited or even somewhat beyond caring about what was happening in the men's tournament. But you said the men's NCAA tournament never disappoints. And they didn't. And what a ride. I mean, from Oakland to North Carolina State and a bunch of teams in the Elite Eight, Purdue, North Carolina State, Tennessee, Illinois, Clemson, Alabama, who either hadn't been to a Final Four or it's been a very long drought for them making in the Final Four. And it seemed like each of these teams had their stories well told throughout the first couple of weeks.
Well told. I got to say, one of my favorite, other than the Oakland story, because they're local, it was so fun to see the guy. And they took NC State to the limit. Maybe
Overtime.
You forget. Yeah. That was an awesome story. And I don't know if you saw all the NIL deals that followed for this guy. Yeah, it was great. One of my favorite games was that Purdue-Tennessee game. The back and forth, this guy Connect was fantastic to watch from Tennessee. And to see, could Purdue get over the hump? I didn't mind seeing Illinois get smoked, and they were the victim of a 30-0 run. That has a lot to do with my disdain for Brad Underwood, their coach, who, Steve, you've told me, by and large, his players, he seems to be a good guy behind the scenes. He just looks like such a jerk.
Well, and the funny thing is, I've seen that with Dan Hurley. I mean, there's two coaches that I would root against, and one would be Brad Underwood, and the other would be Dan Hurley. They met with each other. And Illinois won the Big Ten tournament, and they had a 30-0 run put on them. Now, when somebody goes on a 30-0 run, I expect the opponent to be Elon or Gardner-Webb. something like that.
Yeah,
But
sure.
this was Illinois against UConn. We'll talk about a potential UConn-Purdue matchup. But for the Purdue thing, 1980, the last time they've been to the Final Four, and Purdue is a team that has won more conference championships than anyone else in the Big Ten and has a winning record over every existing Big Ten school in the Big Ten. Of course, they're the only one that could potentially say that. In between the 44 years of not being there, they've watched Michigan go to the Final Four 5 times. They've watched Ohio State go to the Final Four. They've watched Indiana win 3 national championships. Now, one was in 1976, 4 years prior, but you get my point.
Yep.
What else is it? Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan State.
Yep.
Half the Big Ten has played in the Final Four, but Purdue has not. And it's been a mission for them ever since they were the second team only to lose to a 16 seed as the number 1 seed. That happened to them last year. And speaking to a number of people, they feel that it's like championship or bust. You got to do what Virginia did, which was win the whole thing. Yeah, winning and getting to the Final Four is a big weight off of everybody's mind there.
I like a lot of things other than the fact that you have a family member at Purdue, Steve. Matt Painter seems like a likable guy. One of my favorite Big Ten analysts is Robbie Hummel. I just love the way he presents the game and talks about it. They're likable, and like all Big Ten teams, we all have people in our lives, and I have some Purdue people in my life, and I'm happy for them. So I want to see their story. They got to get through NC State. It does seem like UConn is the team to beat, and we'll probably, I know anything can happen in the Final Four. It'll probably end up like they'll be there.
Well, as Kentucky, Michigan, the last time I've seen a team this dominant over a 2-year period that Dan Hurley and UConn did, because they're doing the same thing last year, winning by a ton. And the first part of the second half, the game is over. Each of their tournament games, they've had a 30-point lead so far through 4. They were just as dominant last year. So you got to go back to Krzyzewski and Duke back in the early 90s, and maybe Jerry Tarkanian's running Rebel teams from UNLV that were this dominant.
Yeah.
But what happened to Kentucky in 1993, who was just as dominant? They lost to Michigan in overtime after they had to wait 6 days to play again and let all the hype build up. Michigan was struggling, even though they made it to the Final Four. They didn't make it look easy. Kentucky absolutely dominated. Kentucky was a big favorite. Oh, and they lost to Michigan in overtime.
Yeah, I was there at that game. It was awesome. One of the best games I've ever seen. Jamal Mashburn. I mean, it was fantastic.
Yes.
Again, the NCAA tournament doesn't disappoint. A lot of drama out there. You're saying, Purdue fans, it's win it all or kind of bust to make up for last year. I think in retrospect, if they don't make it, they'll be pretty proud to hang that Final Four banner and get that 44-year drought off there. Because it does. That's why, like Robbie, the game was here in Detroit.
Right.
Robbie Hummel, I mentioned him earlier, kind of broke down after the game. Like, even though he's supposed to be a professional, he couldn't hold it back anymore. So their historic sustained success, means a lot. So we'll see how they do. But that was one of the questions you asked. Can we do it? Well, this is probably the best representative of the Big Ten to give it a shot. We'll see.
They got a big matchup. Zach Edey hasn't had to play a lot of big centers in the Big Ten this particular year. Donovan Clingham of UConn is 7'2", very fluid, can shoot from anywhere on the court. Donovan is a rim rejecter. Blocked 5 or 6 shots. Illinois was just absolutely wasting their time trying to score from inside. And, for the first time, Zach Edey's going to find a guy just about as tall as he is, who is just as fluid as he is, going up against him. So it's among equals. And, in fact, Clingan is actually expected to go higher in the NBA draft than Edey.
So you mentioned equals. I'm not sure which tournament I've found more enjoyable, Steve, the men's or the women's. And if you told me I'd be even saying that and thinking that just a few years ago, I think you were crazy. And I'm not sure. I know the best game I've seen this entire year and for a long time was this LSU-Iowa game with Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese. And props to Angel Reese. She played a great game. The story in that game, though, was Caitlin Clark, her mastery of this game. And frankly, it had historical significance, right? I've seen some of the numbers. Steve, put this in context for us, like this game.
So the ratings came out, and the ratings were higher than any other college basketball game that was played on ESPN. Better than any single NBA game last year, except for Game 5 of the NBA Finals. better than any Major League Baseball game that was played last year. And the bastion of all ratings, college football, only 5 college football games beat the number that LSU and Iowa had. All 3 college football playoff games, Michigan and Ohio State, and the SEC championship between Georgia and Alabama. That means this had higher ratings than Michigan Penn State. This means this had higher ratings than Auburn, Alabama. It's absolutely amazing. And again, 5 years ago, you just wouldn't believe it because there's a reason why the first 2 rounds are played at home sites.
Yeah.
To get attendance.
Yeah. And Steve, look, I know TV eyeballs isn't necessarily the whole story, but TV and streaming eyeballs are really what's dictating the future of college sports right now.
Yeah.
And they were all on this game. And there's going to be a lot of them on the next round because it's not just about Caitlin Clark now, right? It's Paige Beckers. It's Juju Watkins. I'm rattling off people and coaches that it's Dawn Staley and her great team. Can someone beat South Carolina? What if, and I believe the way the bracket's set up, right, they can meet. It could be Iowa, South Carolina in the finals. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Iowa, South Carolina could play in the finals.
Yeah. So it's awesome. I love it. I started my history of college athletics class this week, a cold open, just playing a 2-minute highlight package of that game. And I've known her story because I was introduced to her when I saw the highlights of her comeback 2 years ago against Michigan, where they lost. But this is where, Steve, they were down 15 points or whatever it was in the second half, and she just started to pull up from the logo and started knocking them down. And I watched that on YouTube over and over again, and since I've made it a point to watch her. My jaw was still dropped in this game with some of the plays she made, and it wasn't just the shots. She is cold-blooded. She looks physically so non-assuming. The way she moves around the court, she kind of shuffles her feet like she's not going to explode. But she explodes off the pick. And her movement without the ball is uncanny. Her court vision and her ability to find the open player and create passes that you don't even see are there, it's like Larry Bird kind of magic, artistry out there in the court. And, dude, I just love it. And, again, it's not just about her. But I got to say, I couldn't take my eyes off. And I found myself stopping the game to go, whoa, what did she just do?
Right.
Can I look at that move she just
Because
made?
she does things shooting-wise that nobody else would do in a game other than maybe Steph Curry.
Yeah.
And the thing is, when she's taking shots from 35 to 42 feet away, when you miss, it gets you benched. The thing is, she hit them.
Yeah, right.
And she had to hit them more than once because as a coach at any level, if somebody takes a shot like that and it bricks off, it's like, what are you doing? Sit down. Get your thoughts together and take smarter shots. Well, it means that the first time she did it, she hit it because otherwise she'd be sitting on the bench. So she's, as a young player, underclassman, she was making these shots from the logo all the time. That's her NIL trademark, from the logo, and selling shirts that way. But what we saw this year was what a great passer she was. She was showing that she was more than just a shooter. The events of last year's championship game, nobody know a whole lot about Angel Reese and Flau'jae Johnson and all of that, but that was a very highly tied emotional game that went on in that championship. And there was a lot of bad blood, and there was a lot of talk about that. And what if they were to rematch? And so that kind of fueled things. But what makes a difference between why I think viewers are watching now compared to where it was before is that there were superstar players like Caitlin Clark before, but they were all gathered in one place. They were either all at Tennessee, they were either all at UConn, and they were very, very good players. But
USC back in the day,
where was the foil?
Yeah.
So Caitlin Clark got her foil in Angel Reese, who is not going to take a backseat to anyone, and especially Caitlin Clark, after winning a championship. And I'm watching Iowa's run, and I see some of the star players on the teams that they're facing, and they got a star player that, for whatever reason, is absolutely fantastic, too, for different reasons. One player from Colorado was an absolute speedster, just could race down the court in like 3 seconds, and was a handful to guard. You had LSU's coach, Kim Mulkey, being basically a villain for the entire year, not just on what you talked about Iowa, but just about things in general. You've got a legendary player in Dawn Staley leading South Carolina to an undefeated season so far and is becoming a legendary coach. There's lots of different storylines. There's lots of different great players. And that's why this is gaining a lot of interest. But the other big reason, Greg, is the execution of the play.
The quality of the play.
Much better than it was 10 or 15 years ago. I've been privileged to see it at the high school level, getting vastly improved. I'm seeing it at the college level on TV. Maybe one day this will carry off into the WNBA. Maybe people will start watching that. But I know how it was. The networks weren't putting cameras higher than the 8th row of the arena they were playing in because there was nobody sitting in row 9.
Yeah.
It's very, very different now.
Well, look, if you're going to tell me there's going to be 4 games with Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese next year, I'm going to watch. Okay. And I heard Angel Reese declared. We'll see if it translates. I agree with you. You can have a great player here and there, but the overall quality of the play in the first half of that Iowa LSU game, 45-45 at half, frantic pace, seemingly ridiculous pace in some of the plays that we're making, but by all the players on the court. And that was the difference. This was a great game. This just wasn't what's Caitlin going to do next, although you were wondering the whole time. Sure. She's incredibly competitive. I think she talks crap. I saw her point to the scoreboard a few times when Michigan was complaining about something, scoreboard. Like,
she'll talk trash with the best of them.
Yeah.
And in a not unlike Bill Laimbeer way, sells fouls too, or pain that didn't necessarily really happen.
Yeah.
We've seen that too. As a fan of the Pistons, we love when Bill Laimbeer did it. As not a fan of the Wisconsin Badgers, we hate when Brad Davidson does it.
Yeah. So last time we signed off, we had high hopes of maybe something happening with the Michigan hoops team, which all of this attention around women's hoops and this excitement, and you see pieces and parts of this with the Michigan program. Can we be part of this now? Because wouldn't it be great to have another sport that of high interest that we root for this time of year? We have a few, but suddenly there's a team that could be a new part of the story. So we'll see what Kim Barnes-Rico can do. I won't dwell on it, Steve. I watched their first round game. It ended about as bad as it can go. A 10-point lead in the fourth quarter, in control. I feel like we salted it away with the ball. We kind of did the thing where you dribbled out the shot clock and tried to get off a shot with our best player, Layla Vilia, and she didn't even get to the rim sometimes. The other team made some very unlikely shots, but it's almost like we let them, back in the game. And then it went to overtime, and you just kind of know, Steve, in those situations, when you let it go, it ain't coming back.
No,
it ain't coming back. So I'll leave on a positive note. Like Kim Barnes-Rico and this team it is worth watching. Like if you start to watch them, see if you like it. Can we get a team on par that is one of these teams that factors in this story that's playing out in front of us? I hope so. But we did have another team that is making history, Steve. It continues to, which is the other team we talked about last time. And we even talked about Michigan State. That's the hockey program.
The hockey team a month ago was suspect of actually making the NCAA tournament. Some things had to go the way, and they earned their way into the NCAA tournament by winning. And part of it is winning a semifinal game at the Mariucci Arena in Minnesota. Third time they've done that to Minnesota at their place in a row. They got in the NCAA tournament as a 3 seed, upset North Dakota, and then you have the 6th meeting with Michigan State. And I think Michigan won the first one, but Michigan State's won the last 4 or something like that, including the Big Ten tournament championship game that went into overtime. You talk about a bad Saturday, Michigan women losing, and then the Michigan hockey team lost later on that same evening in overtime to Michigan State for the Big Ten title. It's a bad day. But Michigan rebounds here, and they are now in the Frozen Four for the 28th time.
And that's over 36% of all Frozen Fours. Now, there are some historical elements there. There used to just be 4 teams. And Michigan, by the way, Michigan's coach is the one who urged the other coaches to say we should have a tournament. So there is some reasons why we've been in so many early on, but this is 3 straight. And for State, this is crushing. The only thing I can compare it to now, if on a rivalry scale, looking at Michigan's hockey program, Michigan's a 10. Okay, this is the rival. For Michigan, absolutely Michigan State is our rival in hockey. I don't think there's any question, but they're not a 10 because there's Notre Dame and there's Ohio State's out there because of the football thing. This was big for Michigan State's program because they pretty much dominated this year in our matchups. And this was their opportunity. They finally won a Big Ten championship. They hadn't yet. Now they used to win CCHH, and the Big Ten took over and all that. They have a great history. But this was their opportunity to turn the tables. And almost in a stroke of bad luck, they didn't have a lot to win to beat Michigan, to gain, in other words. They had already vanquished, in the words of Jim Branstetter, their rival, and now they got to place them again. And the only thing I can think of, it's not quite the same stakes, but what if Michigan had beaten TCU and Ohio State had, and those games were close. Ohio State had a field goal, right? And we had to play them again after double vanquishing Ohio State. It would have kind of sucked for a lot of us. And I know Sam Webb and on the radio was
so
like,
it never would have happened.
Bring them on, or whatever. Right. Exactly. No, that would have been torturous. That's a little bit of what happened in state hockey.
That was Michigan State's attitude going into that one. So glad they're in our bracket. We can beat them again. So
not everybody.
But one Michigan State player did, and that's the one I'll remember.
Yeah, if you watch that press conference, man, their hearts were ripped out. And that's sports, man, and that's tough. But good on Frankie Nazar for the reverse between the legs pass to Gavin Brindley. A play that's not going to be up there with the Mike Legg lacrosse goal, the Michigan as the kids call it, but it's up there somewhere, and it's going to be played forever. That moment, and for Duker to get in there and get that, I think the game-winning goal, the third goal, Dylan Duke I'm talking about. So perhaps more. Wouldn't it be something if in 98 they followed up the Michigan National Championship in football with the 98 National Championship in hockey?
Now you're talking.
Now we can have a chance to repeat that little nuance of history. It's tough road. The other teams are the top three teams, if outside of Michigan State in the country, so we got to get through them. But Steve, we got another fun thing to watch for where we thought our spring was kind of dashed with the basketball program.
Right.
Suddenly, we have a chance to make history. Wouldn't that be something, Steve, if we win this national championship?
You call it corn. We called it maize.
We haven't won a lot of them recently. 2 in the 90s, right? This would be our first.
96 and 98.
But tons of trips and tons of chances. But wouldn't that little piece of serendipity, synchronicity,
It'd be great.
Wouldn't that be wonderful?
And the law of averages will start working better in Michigan's favor in the Frozen Four. So, meanwhile, still basking in the glow, though, Greg, of Michigan football, the undefeated and undisputed national champions. Until next time, go blue, Greg.
Go blue.